All right.
We're live.
Hello, Internet. Well, hello, Internet.
Yeah,
This
you're
happened
just
last
saying
time.
hello to the internet. Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
It took
Uh,
it. There we go.
There we
Okay.
go.
Okay, I can't laugh
Hello.
too hard or my
Hello.
lap bounces around.
Oh no. Gonna make us seasick.
I'll try not to.
Welcome to those of you joining us. We're going to take a few seconds to just kind of let more people trickle in, but you're in the right place if you're looking for the TouchMix webinar on the mysteries of compression. If you're looking for something else, please stick around. We're a
You're
good time.
welcome to hang out.
Yeah.
Should be interesting. Try to keep it fun. Cool. Yep. Got some people still joining up here. So, like Jacob said,
Perfect.
we'll spend a few seconds and make sure people are getting in okay.
Jason, it's very green behind you. Looks like
It's
you're on a different
quite green.
planet.
Yes. That's what I'm going for. Planet green. Planet Hulk.
Yes.
Da-da-da. The join link in the registration email doesn't work, but you are here. Part one, I will grab a link to part one and to give this because we're gonna have that up on our webinar on demand page pretty soon. But I'll go ahead and put that in here for you guys. I'm gonna go find that, and then maybe we can start the introductions.
Cool.
Cool. So I will add all the customer support phone numbers to the chat.
Perfect. Cool. Then I'll just go ahead and I think we can get
Yeah.
started.
Why don't
There's
you
some
kick it off,
intros while
Jacob? And I'm gonna
Jason's looking for that.
pull up this link here.
So for those of you who are here, welcome. This is the webinar for the Mysteries of Compression Part 2 for the Touch Mix. My name is Jacob. I'm the training coordinator at QSC, so I'm just going to be moderating, so you won't hear a lot from me, but you will be hearing a lot from Jason, who's going to be leading you through the webinar. And we also have Golden with us. She is an expert on the topics that she's going to help answer all the questions that come through and kind of tag along with Jason and help him discuss the topic as well. So for anybody who has questions, which we hope you do have them because we want you to feel a part of this, please put them in the Q&A. We're not going to have the chat enabled. It's just can get a little messy having the two and having to check both. So just go ahead and put everything in the Q&A. But we do ask that you keep your questions related to the topic at hand. If they get off topic and we get off topic, then we can get lost on this train of thought and we will go on forever. So we want to make sure that we're keeping this to an hour. So if you do have questions that are off topic, we still want you to be able to ask them. And we have a great team with our tech support team. And that info is up on the screen right now. Golden has also posted it in the chat, so you can go ahead and copy that information from there, and you'll be able to have that. I have another helper here who wants to be a part of the webinar, but he'll have to wait his turn. So that's our tech support team. They're a very good team, so please, if you have any questions that aren't related to this topic, go ahead and send them on over there. Otherwise, if you have a microphone and you want to get a little bit more involved with your question, raise your hand and that'll tell us that you have a mic, that we can unmute you and you can ask your question live. We still ask that you put your question in the Q&A just so we can kind of check and make sure it's related to the topic hand and that you're not going to lead us on this trail to nowhere. But we still want you to be able to ask any questions. So that is all of the information related to getting those answered.
Right.
Do we have a link?
And
Oh, Jason, and you put
so
the link
I
there.
did put the link to
Cool.
part 1 in the chat, so you're welcome to copy that and check that out. And so that there are clearly some of you that that haven't seen part 1. This is part 2. So we are we are picking up the conversation that we started with in part 1. So I don't want to be leaving anyone in the dust or confusing anybody. I will kind of review a little bit of part 1 to kick this off. But yeah, I'm definitely, since you're here, I invite you to stay, and I hope you can get a lot out of this. Maybe afterwards, kind of go back and watch part 1 if at any point you're confused or you need a little catch up with that. So yeah, do that. I'll make myself big again. So there you go. That's part 1 up there. I'm going to put another link in the chat right now as well. See if that works. Yep. That is another link that you're all going to want to grab right now. That is a link to the audio stream for my mixer. I do have a mixer here. That looks great, doesn't it? There we go. I will be playing audio kind of throughout the lesson today on my mixer so that we can do some critical listening and experiment with kind of the compression theories a little bit and hear what it's actually doing to some audio tracks in real time. We're streaming this audio out over a separate web browser instead of doing it through the Zoom call here for 2 reasons. One is to simply maintain a higher fidelity of audio quality. This service allows us to kind of stream high quality or higher quality audio over a separate web browser than we would get through the actual Zoom call here. The second reason is to allow you guys, as the attendees, the ability to kind of mix the levels independently if you need that. So you can hear my voice in the call here and you can hear my audio in that separate browser, and you will be able to maintain independent level control of those, so you can kind of get it at a comfortable level for yourselves out there. So go ahead and grab that. Hopefully everyone's got that going, and I will go ahead and play a few seconds of the track here just to make sure that everyone's hearing that. If you're not hearing it okay, or if there are problems, just let us know in the Q&A, and we'll see what we can do to troubleshoot that quickly up at the top here. So here's the track coming at you now. Yep. That sweet, smooth sound. R&B, funk blues. I don't know what this is. It's a fine track. We're going to be listening to that through the duration of the lesson today. Hopefully that works for everybody. With that said, let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, so just for a quick kind of recap of part 1, or just to kind of get this part out of the way, compression in general is realistically one of the more common tools used in audio mixing and engineering, both in live sound and recording applications. So in general, a compressor is a tool that is used to shrink or compress the dynamic range of an audio signal. That's what a compressor does. And again, we went over all of that in part 1 in great detail. But just so we are on the same page here, that's kind of what it does. So it's going to condense, compress the dynamic range of an audio signal. The dynamic range of a signal is referencing the volume level over time. That's what we're talking about. And to extrapolate on that a little bit, so if you think of an audio signal, at certain times the signal might be quite loud, and at other times it can be very, very soft. Certainly in any musical situation, you're going to have pretty broad fluctuations in volume across a single signal, and then at the same time across an entire mix. So if you think about an entire end master output or mix bus, if you listen to a song or a piece of music, throughout that piece of music, you're going to have dynamic changes throughout it. If you extrapolate that over a longer period of time for an entire performance, you're going to have audio fluctuations or sound or level fluctuations from song to song even. And then down to individual performers, individual signals within that mix, there's going to be, a variation of volume throughout the performance of that instrument. The most notable probably being vocals. A voice is capable of getting very, very loud and very, very quiet within an instant almost. So being able to bring those 2 points together, the very, very loud part and the quiet part of a signal, kind of squish those closer together. And then you have the ability to kind of take that condensed or compressed signal and boost it even further in your mix while still maintaining that overall dynamic control. Creates a lot of advantages when you're mixing different signal levels, trying to get them to balance and sit well together and play nicely together. And it has some creative advantages as well. You can definitely use compression to add some different types of coloration to signals in different ways and things like that. So that is what we're going to be getting into today, is a little bit more of the creative side of things. Towards the end, more or less. Specifically, what we're going to be getting into today are beyond just the discussion of what a compressor is, what it does, and then kind of the best ways to use it functionally and creatively. We're going to go over a couple of advanced compression techniques, specifically side chaining or sidechain compression. We're going to cover multiple compression, which is going to be using more than one compressor within a signal chain. And then we're going to talk about limiting. Well, not and then. I'm actually going to start us off with talking about limiting. But limiting is certainly a part of the compression conversation that should be discussed. And I'm going to take it there first. So we're going to actually start today with a little conversation about limiting and go over what limiters are and how they work and how they're different from a compressor. And then we'll kind of jump off from there and talk about some of the cooler, more creative things you can do with sidechain compression and multiple compression. All right, so I've already got you on my mixer here. A couple things, you heard my track. This is a full 24 track mix. So I've got 24 inputs coming in to my mixer here. And I'm able to mix this all independently. So you'll be one thing that I'm going to do right now that I wanted to do this on camera is I'm going to engage a mode on the TouchMix 30 here called Solo in Place. And I'm going to do that by going into the menu, going into my mixer setup screen, and up at the top there is the Solo in Place option. I'm going to engage that. And what that does is that changes my cue function. You see now on all my channels where the Q button is, it's now an orange button, kind of an amber orange button, and it's got the letters SIP, stands for Solo in Place. This is going to allow me to solo out any channel I want to and hear that soloed in the main mix. So this is a cool feature on here that I'm going to be using that allows me to solo out certain channels so that I can kind of isolate channels as we work with them and as we do our listening throughout the lesson here today. It's something I wanted to kind of point out and make you aware of. And then just another kind of a note on the topic today. Most of the topic is not necessarily TouchMix centric. This is general audio knowledge that I'm just trying to share with you guys, and I'm using a TouchMix to demonstrate these various techniques. But these are definitely not something that can only be done with the TouchMix. These are actually very common techniques that are done with just about any mixer you can think of, and certainly done within recording software applications, DAWs, and things like that. So whether you own a TouchMix or not, hopefully this information is valuable to you at some level. All right. Let's go. Let's get into this now. Enough beating around. Limiting. So limiting, as I said, is similar to compressing or compression, but it has a slightly different goal. So as opposed to simply reducing the dynamic range of a signal, which is what a compressor is doing, limiting is the act of putting an actual limit on how loud a signal can get, hence the name limiter. So we're actually using this tool to set an output limit in decibels, in which that signal is not able to get above that level. In a compressor, we do have a threshold. Again, a little bit of a review, and we're going to be taking a look at that in here. I'll go ahead and just punch into my channel now. Go to our main mix, and just to iterate this, your limiters are typically going to be found on outputs. If you go into an input on your channel, you're going to find a compressor. That's an input channel, and then an output is where you're going to have your limiters. And there's a reason for that, which I'll get into in a minute. So I'm going to open up my main output and go to my limiter on the screen there, and we'll go ahead and engage that. We'll toggle that on. But yeah, so what I was saying is the threshold in a limiter as opposed to a compressor is actually setting a line, setting a limit on how loud that signal is going to get. Whereas in a compressor, you do have your threshold here. And if we want to take a look at that, we can. So we still have this threshold line there. In a compressor, the threshold is the point at which the compressor is going to engage. That's the point at which it starts to compress the signal. But it is not necessarily keeping the signal below that line. It is just taming or tapering that signal once it does get above that threshold line. And that is dictated by the ratio, the amount of compression applied. And typically, you know, when your signal level gets above your threshold, all you're really doing there is lessening that amount above that threshold. In a limiter, we are setting a hard limit. We're saying, no, we don't want the audio signal at any point to get any louder than this line. And the piece of this tool that dictates that is actually the threshold. So realistically, a limiter is more or less a compressor. The biggest difference, the main key difference, is the ratio amount. And again, a little bit of review. A ratio, if we want to talk about a ratio on a compressor, a 2-to-1 ratio, like I've got here, 2.3-to-1. That's less than that. Let's get some even numbers. 2-to-1 is telling us that for every decibel, or for every 2 decibels that the signal goes above our threshold, the compressor is now going to take that 2 dB above our threshold and compress it to 1 dB. And if you extrapolate that, 2 dB will be compressed to, or sorry, 4 dB will be compressed to 2 dB, 3 dB to, or 6 dB to 3 dB, I'm backwards, 8 dB to 4 dB, 5 dB to 10 dB, you see where I'm going. So, you know, that is kind of how you can picture your compressor and what it is doing to the signal. In a limiter, you can see our default on the limiter here is 10-to-1, which is much higher than a 2-to-1 or much higher than really what you would find within the realm of compression. Because when you start getting to 10-to-1 and above that, now we are adding what we most would consider an extreme amount of compression. And because of that, we're now setting a limit on how loud that signal can get because of that threshold. And if you kind of visualize what that's doing again, so at a 10-to-1 ratio, you know, let's say our signal gets above our signal by 10 dB. We're able to get it up 10 dB above this limit, this line. That is going to be compressed to a single dB. And the higher you go, the more of a wall you're kind of creating there. If I double that at a 20-to-1 ratio, now imagine the signal peaking that threshold by 20 dB. That 20 dB is now going to be compressed to a single dB. That is extreme. That is crushing that signal. That is also not real. That's outside the realm of reality for a signal to get that far above that threshold to be compressed at all. So at that point, that high ratio level is creating a cap. It's creating a hard limit. We can be confident that our signal will not exceed whatever we set it at here. So at the default of negative 12 dB, if I take that down even further, we can set ourselves a nice limit line, and our signal does not get any louder than that. The reason why a lot of times you're going to find limiters on the output as opposed to input is because one of the primary functions, at least in live sound, of a limiter is to protect your downstream equipment. So this is my main output. And the mixer is expecting for this to be outputting to maybe an amplifier or a powered loudspeaker. And so if we overload that output signal at any point, we risk damaging that equipment that's downstream. We risk damaging the amplifier inputs or the speaker inputs or both. So oftentimes limiters are used to set a limit to add some protection to that equipment that's down the line there. So that is the primary function of them in a live application. They are also used to add a little bit of coloration sometimes. And as we kind of get deeper into the multiple compression topic, we can definitely take a look at how they're used in a little bit more creative regard. But let's go ahead and just kind of see this thing in action for a second here. I'm going to get the track playing, and I'm going to kind of take this into a couple of extremes here, so we can really get an idea for what it's doing to the audio and kind of hear what it's doing, and then we'll kind of mellow it out to a more realistic setting and get a look at what it's doing. So here is our audio, and you can see it is already giving us some gain reduction on the gain reduction meter here. And again, this is just the default settings. I've not really tweaked it beyond this point. So I'm going to leave the ratio alone. And if I just take the threshold down a little bit, you hear that? So what we're doing is we're now, since we're bringing this threshold down, and since we're saying, okay, at a 10-to-1 ratio, we're not, that is a hard threshold. That is a limit. That the signal is not getting above that point. So as we take that threshold down, our signal is getting quieter and quieter, which is essentially what you'd expect. Now, a couple other things that we're going to note here is this empty space over here. If I go back to my compressor, we have a gain knob in the compressor. So a compressor has a gain stage within it. And a lot of times this might be called a makeup gain stage within other compressors and things like that. It's the same thing. But because with our compressor, we're still doing the same thing. We're still, as we compress the signal, we are essentially attenuating it. But the gain allows us to make that up. So we can compress the signal and kind of squash the dynamics, so we have a little bit better control over the dynamics. And then we can use the makeup gain to bring it back up to a more pleasing level. And that actually gives us the effect of taking the lowest points in the signal and raising them up without the high peaks getting too out of hand and getting too peaky, for less of another word that I can think of right now, for lack of another word. A limiter is not going to give you that option, because a limiter's goal is different. We're not attenuating with the goal of trying to bring that back up again so it can sit within the mix. At this point, we're done with the mix. We're applying this to the full output, and we simply want to set ourselves a cap. So that is another big difference. I'm going to play this again. Simply back that off, something a little more realistic. You can see we are getting some pretty consistent gain reduction on there. I'll stop talking for a few seconds. If I take it out, all right. So the main thing is it gets quieter, because I've got this threshold at a point, where it is kind of constantly catching, some bit of the signal. We're backing it off. So if I were to ease this off still, if I take it up to the point where I'm not seeing anything or barely anything, it's just kind of tickling it. That might be a realistic setting for this. Now I'm going to take it down a little bit more, catch a little bit more of the peaks, tickle it a little more. There we go. Now, if I take it out, there is a difference, but it's a lot more subtle. So we're not necessarily adding much of a difference or much of an effect to our audio output. We're kind of just setting ourselves a cap here, so we know, cool, I've got a limit. I can see it kind of hitting every now and then. If at any point, I get a extreme peak, or I get a runaway transient that kind of slips by, I'm not going to damage any of my equipment down the line, or damage anyone's ears down the line. Definitely also valuable goods. All right. The other difference that I want to mention here is the attack and release. So the attack time on a compressor can be taken all the way down to 0. And again, just to reiterate, the attack and the release time dictate how quickly the limiter or compressor is going to start to compress or limit the signal once it is above your threshold. And the release is how quickly it releases the signal once the signal goes back down below the threshold. And these are used in a compressor slightly differently than you use them on a limiter. In a compressor, they're used to kind of control the way it is compressing a signal and how soon it is compressing that signal and how soon it is releasing that signal. And those two aspects really play heavily into how realistic it sounds or how natural it sounds. In a limiter here, we actually have and because of that, in a compressor, if we jump back one more time, in a compressor, we don't have the ability to completely zero out the attack time. It's got a minimum of 0.5 milliseconds, which is an infantile amount of time, but still it is not instant or immediate. On a limiter, we do have the ability to take that right down to zero, so there's no time. So as soon as the threshold is hit, that is instantly and immediately compressing that signal. And if we listen to what that sounds like, we play with these parameters for a little bit, you can kind of get an idea. Now I'm taking the threshold down to an unrealistic or really kind of an unusable level. With this attack time at 0 versus a little wider open, or all the way open, you can kind of hear how that is affecting the signal. So at the, I'll restart this. At the first extreme of 0 time, so immediate activation of our limiter, we can definitely hear it is a lot harsher sound. It's driving it to audible distortion, pretty much. Whereas if I ease it off a little bit, because of my threshold, we're still getting a pretty heavy distortion effect, but it sort of breathes a little bit more now. Take that somewhere kind of in the middle there, and then we can play with our release time. So clear sonic differences in where these parameters are set. So again, the quicker time is a little bit more harsh, a little bit more unnatural sounding. But if we were to take this back up now, get back to where we had it before. With everything else set to a more realistic level, we play with these things. Kind of hear a little bit more of how we want them to behave. That sounds pretty good to me. Take it out. See? Now we have very, very little sonic difference with the limiter in versus out. So, at least within the functional application of just kind of using it to protect our ears and protect our equipment out of the output, that's kind of how you might go about finding those settings in a limiter to set that up. And hopefully, clearly, based on me kind of playing with it for a second there, you can get a pretty good idea of what it does in terms of the sonic quality and when you kind of hit those extremes with it. So might be a creative tool that you can employ and kind of tweak with and play with there. As far as the live sound application, that's about as far as we're going to go into the discussion. Within the recording application, and I'm not going to really show a lot of that here, but as I mentioned, within the world of recording, limiting is used very abundantly, and it is sort of the main event when you even get into the mastering phase of your recording session. So you've got your tracking session, then you might have an editing and a mixing session, and then it all kind of comes to a culmination when you master your project. And within that mastering phase of your recording, you're definitely applying limiting to some degree. And then at that point, when you're kind of dealing with the DAW or even rack hardware, physical hardware, within that sort of application, there are a few different types of limiting that you might encounter with a few different parameters. There, you got peak limiters. You've got limiters with a look ahead feature, which is kind of cool. Kind of actually has the ability to kind of look ahead, look up the signal stream a little bit, and kind of see the peaks coming so that it can adjust itself kind of on the fly. And so there's all kinds of cool, crazy things that you can be done with limiting in this day and age. This was a basic kind of explanation and introduction to a limiter, the basics of limiting, and kind of what sets a limiter apart from a compressor. And that's about as far as I'm going to take it for this lesson. However, I'll go ahead and pause for questions if there are any at this point on that. With the limiter, what is a safe level to set the limiter to ensure mains are not damaged? That's a great question, and that kind of that's not a singular answer. That takes time. That takes a little bit of kind of tweaking. It also depends on what you have specifically connected to that output, whether if you have amplifiers that are then powering speakers, or if you have powered speakers, it's going to that's going to play a factor, and also kind of how you've gain staged not only your mix, but how you've set the gain stages on your amplifiers or powered loudspeakers also kind of plays a factor in that. Yeah, Golden, would you have anything to add to that? What's some advice that you can impart on somebody as far as kind of trying to find that limit level when you're protecting your downstream equipment? I'm good at talking.
Well, one of the main things that you can see is if your meters on your main mix are blowing up on your main left right. So you may want to set a limit on your main left right so you're not blowing up the signal.
Yeah, that's right. And actually, I can demonstrate that.
Ouch.
If we take a look at this, I'm going to push this a little bit. The limiter off. All right. Take a look at my output. Get into the yellow, not really getting into the red. But if I turn my limiter on, and I take my threshold down, look at that. That is reflected in my meter there. So between your output meter.
This happens to me a lot when DJs are submixing to me. They'll keep turning their levels up and up and up till they're clipping.
It's maddening.
And then I'll have to set a limiter there to, well, I'll protect the channel is what I'm doing.
Yeah. Yeah, very good. I mean, so to answer your question, you kind of pay attention to your output meter and your gain reduction meter and your limiter as well. Those two indicators are kind of going to give you the best sense of what your signal is doing and how it's performing and at what level it is being sent out. Yeah, if you ever see red on your output meter, that's bad. You don't ever want to be sending red because that means that your output is clipping. You're getting peaking, clipping on your output. So if that's happening, you're definitely at risk for damaging any of your speakers that are down the line. So, keep your output meter kind of at the unity, I would say. If you're kind of dancing up into the yellow realm, you're probably still fine. But the limiter can definitely give you an extra stage, an extra advantage on, keeping that maintained.
Yep. And sometimes it's important to realize your system may just run out of gas.
Yeah, it happens.
And you can't push it any farther.
You can't go. Yeah. I'm already pulled over. I can't pull over any farther. Yeah, cool. That was a good question. Thank you for that. Don't see any others. If you have any more questions regarding to limiting, please feel free to put them. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and move us along. Let's talk about side chaining. All right, so we're going to leave limiting now. We're going to go back into compression. We're going to talk about something called sidechain compression. So sidechain compression is a little bit different. It is a type of compression where the compression effect level, the compression effect on one channel is affected by the level of another channel. So it's kind of a crazy little roundabout. And the way you set it up, I'm going to show you how to do it here on the Touch Mix in a second, but in general, the way you would set this up on a mixer or within a recording software is you place a compressor on one channel, and there is typically a sidechain feature within the compressor somewhere. You're going to want to go into that side feature, activate the sidechain, and then select another channel within your session or within your mix to go to the sidechain. And what that does is it now takes the signal level of that secondary channel and uses that to activate the compressor. So instead, so what you're doing essentially is the channel that the compressor is applied to is not listening to the signal of that channel itself. It's listening to another channel's signal and then using that to activate its threshold. A common example of using this technique would be using the kick drum to kind of compress the level of a bass. Now this can be done in a few different styles of music and is very commonly used in a few different styles of music, most notably EDM and dance music, where you have a very, very strong and heavy and thick kind of pulsing drum beat, or even just like that 4-on-the-floor kick pattern with a really heavy kind of non-stop bass or synth bass happening. And you use the kick drum to compress the bass synth or the bass guitar every time the kick drum happens, and it sort of just pushes that bass back into the mix and allows it to kind of pulse with it. Gets kind of a really cool rhythmic kind of pulse effect as well that kind of is more of it gets you more into like that vibe, that pumping vibe. It's a cool effect. It's used a lot in rock music as well. So again, kind of that just where you've got a lot happening all at once and you've got a lot of stuff that's kind of loud more or less all the time, and you don't want your material, like your low end material, to kind of get lost or muddy in the mix. And you've got got a slamming kick drum pattern. You can sidechain that to the bass guitar, and it kind of gives them a nice synergy together, and allows them to play off each other within the mix and not drown each other out or get lost. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. I'm going to do exactly what I just mentioned. I'm going to take our bass channel in this track, and I'm going to use the kick drum to sidechain it. I'm going to sidechain the kick drum to this compressor. So I'm going to go into my bass channel here. I'm going to turn on my compressor, and then down here in the lower right hand corner is the sidechain feature. I'm going to go ahead and turn it on with the little in button there. And then if I select that field there, it'll turn yellow. I can use my wheel here. You can't see the wheel on my screen, but if you have a Touch Mix or are familiar with Touch Mix, there is a large encoder wheel that you'll have, and I can use that to scroll through all of my channels on the board. And I'm going to choose my kick drum channel. So there we go. So I've got the kick pulled up. I've got this punched in, and now I'm going to use my handy solo in place feature at first here. I'm going to solo my kick drum, and I'm going to solo the bass guitar, and we're going to play our audio back and see what happens. So the first thing we're going to be looking for is our point of gain reduction. All right, so I'm going to turn this off for a second so we can find our bearings. All right, so there's the kick drum and the bass soloed. Go ahead and get this compressor turned on. So immediately when I turned that compressor on, the bass kind of came to life slightly. And I'm gonna take this down, there we go, until I find the point of compression. And we'll be able to see that indicated on the gain reduction meter there. And what I want is I want to see at least some compression every time that drum is hitting. So I should see that line up with the kick drum hit. So I can take this down a little bit more. I'm actually going to take the threshold, the ratio up to 3:1. Give it a little bit more compression here. There we go. All right, now I'm going to take it out. There's a subtle difference. I'm going to take it out again. Put it back in. So they kind of gel a little bit together now. Now again, this is This is sort of a bluesier track, so it's not so much like a straight ahead rock or heavy rock song or even a pop or EDM track, but we can kind of still hear the dynamics change between those two instruments as I sidechain my kick drum here. Now let's go ahead and go out here. I'm gonna take the kick out of the equation, so we only listen to the bass for a second. I'm gonna open this up a little bit. Let's take that out. Sounds fine. But if we hear it, if we A and B just the bass a little bit with the compressor on and off, once you turn the compressor on, when you pull it out, comparatively, the bass sounds a little flat. It kind of got a little bit more life in it now. It's got a slightly more grit. That's part of the song where the bass drops out. So restart the track, and I'm actually going to take this out of solo in place and give us. Let's turn my limiter off. Okay. In the context of the full mix, I'm going to take the compressor off. Pretty cool. So there you go. That's a little example of sidechain compression, and it just gives you a little advantage. It's a little, it's kind of a way to kind of glue certain instruments together within the mix a little bit, and it's a way to kind of ensure that a particular track or channel doesn't ever kind of get pushed out of the way by something that it might be competing with, by kind of applying that sidechain compression from whatever that other channel or instrument might be. You can kind of glue those things together and allow them to kind of ebb and flow and fluctuate together within the mix, so one is not necessarily pushing one out of the way or drowning one or the other out at any point. So there you go. That's pretty cool. Just something worth noting is, I've kind of mentioned that it is very heavily used in pop and dance and EDM and different genres of rock and things like that. Some places where you probably will never hear this technique would be like acoustic-based music or orchestral, classical music, things like that. Things that sort of are a lot more reliant on wide dynamic fluctuations. Something like this is not really going to work in that kind of application, because you really want those big kind of sweeping fluctuations between the different instruments, and even kind of in and out of certain pieces where you have those very, very quiet moments, and it's got the big swells and crescendos and things like that. There's no place for sidechaining anything to anything else. Another kind of just a cool factoid, sidechaining compression is really can work really well for bringing out vocals. And in fact, the first instance or the earliest form of sidechaining was done by DJs. And they would use this technique so that their MC microphone could be heard over the track that they were playing at any time. And it sort of evolved, and now it's called ducking, but it's the same concept. So the way a ducker works is essentially what's happening with sidechaining. The microphone that is going through the ducker is activating, a threshold that is then kind of compressing down whatever material the ducker is assigned to, so that microphone can be heard over that material without turning that off. So it's just kind of pushing it out of the way so that the MC can be heard clearly. There you go. So that is kind of where sidechaining evolved from. Pretty cool. Cool. Any questions on that? We do have a question. Let's see. With sidechaining channels, will it affect mixing later on with your software? So I'm going to take a stab at kind of understanding where this question is coming from. I'm going to make the assumption that you're referring to using the mixer with a DAW. So you're using this as an interface with your DAW, and maybe applying processing, on the mixer, or kind of using them in tandem. Okay, cool, gotcha. So depending on how you have your session set up, yes or no. So if you were just using this as a straight interface, and meaning you've got your USB connected to your DAW session, and you've got all your tracks loaded up into their respective channels in your session there. Actually, go over here real quick. So if you've got a session loaded up, and you've got all of your channels in your session, and you've got whatever channels from the mixer assigned to these appropriately, and you're using this just to track stuff in, no. If that's as far as you're going, no, because with just that simple setup, all you're doing is streaming the audio from the mixer into your session, and it's coming right from the preamp. So the USB pickoff point is right from the preamp. So all of the processing that's happening on the mixer is not being taken into your session. It's kind of assuming that you're going to use your DAW to mix it down after you've recorded it. However, there is a way that you can route the audio, or more or less the main audio from the mixer back into your session on its own channel, so that you can kind of create a loop. And I actually cover this in detail in another webinar that we did on recording. We did a whole recording webinar topic a few months ago. You should be able to find the recording for that. We do have that up on the on-demand page. I'll put the link up to that on-demand page at the end of the session today here. But yeah, essentially what you do is you can create a loop. So where your channels, all your channels individually come into your DAW session, and then you have an output from your session here that takes basically the output from your DAW back into your mixer here, as well as all of your individual channels. So you're kind of splitting things in two ways and sending them in two directions at the same time. So you've got all of your channels coming into your DAW, and then at the same time passing backwards back into your individual channels on the mixer, and then you can use the. This is a little bit of a whoops. It's a little bit of a tangent, but I don't mind sharing this. You use the 2-track recording bus on the mixer itself to send your main mix back into the DAW. So essentially you create this big kind of confusing loop in your setup here, which allows you to then use the processing on the mixer and have that be heard downstream in your DAW session. And essentially at that point, with this setup, you'd more or less be talking about like kind of your final mix down stage. So you've done all your tracking, you've done all your editing, and you want to just use the tools on the mixer in conjunction with your DAW, within the mix down process. So by creating that setup with your routing, you can in fact do that. And at that point, yes, if you're applying side chaining, if you're applying any processing on the mixer, you are going to hear that in the mix down through the DAW as well. So yeah, I hope that was a really quick answer for a very long explanation. So I hope that suffices for now, and I'll put up the link to those previous sessions so you can go check out that recording webinar that we did as well. That was a good topic. Cool. All right. You're welcome, David. Very happy to answer your questions. Cool. Let's go ahead. Time's moving right along here. Let's get into our last section here, last segment here, which is multiple compression. And this, as I sort of already alluded to, multiple compression is where you apply more than one compressor within a single signal chain. Now there are two primary methods of this. You have your series compression and you have parallel compression. If either of those terms are familiar to you, that's awesome. If not, I'm going to go ahead and explain what that means. So basically what you're going to do in any of these scenarios, whether you're on a mixer or in a DAW, and again, these techniques can be used in just about any recording or mixing application, but they require you to have either what's called a bus within a DAW or subgroups on a mixer. Essentially just another stop that you can send the audio to and process it at another stage before either blending it back together or sending it straight to the main output. In a DAW, again, this is going to be called a bus. On a mixing console, you'll usually find that in the form of subgroups. And the TouchMix 30 Pro does include 8 subgroups, so we can use these different techniques, these multiple compression techniques. Many of these techniques are very commonly used in recording again. But again, if you do have access to subgroups on a mixer, you can definitely do this stuff in a live application, and it's pretty cool, and you can do some pretty fun creative things with these techniques. Let's go ahead and start with parallel compression. We'll run through an example of that. In general, parallel compression is used to sort of give a little bit more weight or density to kind of thicken certain elements of the mix up. It's very commonly used, again, kind of within your pop and rock genres. It's very common in recording to use these techniques on drums and or bass. They can also be very effective on vocals and things like that in a live application, and that's what I'm going to show you. I'm going to apply this technique to the lead vocal channel in this mix. And it works like this. You have a vocal channel. I have my vocal channel here. And within my vocal channel, I've got it turned off. I'm going to turn my compressor on. Actually, I'm going to recall a preset. Nope. Saved it on a different mixer. Way to go, Jason. All right. I'm going to quickly dial this up. And I'm going to want my threshold about there. Those are fine. Let's go 3 to 1. Cool. So I'm compressing the channel at the channel level. So I've got one compressor here. I'm then going to send this channel to a subgroup. I'm going to go to my subgroups, and it's going to pick an empty subgroup that I'm not using. Subgroup 1 looks like it'll do just fine. The first thing I'll need to do is go into the setup and assign that particular channel to this subgroup. And I'm very simply just going to hit the male vocal assignment channel there. So now that channel is assigned to my subgroup here, and within this application what's happening is it is going directly, the input's coming into this channel, and this channel is processing it, and that is going to my main output. It is also going to my subgroup, and then I'm going to process it within the subgroup, and the subgroup will also output it to my main output. You notice my fader on my subgroup's all the way down, so right now, if I turn this on, I'm not going to hear anything that's happening in the subgroup yet, because I'm going to have to fade this up. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the signal from the subgroup, and I'm going to blend it together with the channel signal itself within the main mix and get a blend of those two together. So this is where the parallel comes from. I'm using two different compressors in parallel to each other. Okay, so I've made my assignment. I'm going to go into my compressor. I'm going to leave it on compressor, and I'm going to punch that in. And I'm going to give myself a slightly higher compressor ratio in here. I'm going to go to 4 to 1. Back off the attack a little bit here, and see what that does. Also, for now, I'm going to solo that channel. Let's listen to what this does. Oops. Solo, not mute. Okay. It's okay. So we're not hearing this yet because I've got it faded down. Just want to make sure that we're going to get some compression out of this. There we go. So on my subgroup compressor, I'm going to hit the compressor slightly harder than my channel compressor itself. I'm driving that thing. Back that off. There we go. Okay. Now let's get this going.
They're all around.
Start to see signal come up here.
Oh, these blues done came and tried to take me down.
So we've got that.
Oh, the blues.
If I mute that,
are all around me. Said these terrible blues.
Okay, so there is hopefully a difference that you heard in when that channel's muted versus unmuted. Now the real power of this comes when I actually bring the full mix back in.
It's keeping my head above the ground.
Super loud mix. All right, listen to the vocals for a few bars. And I'm gonna punch this in. Here we go. adds just a little bit of weight. It's subtle. It's a very subtle technique, especially applied to vocals, but it's just got a little bit more weight, and it draws your ear a little bit more to that vocal part without dismissing the rest of the elements of the mix. It pulls your ear to that a little bit, but you still got everything else going on.
I'm talking about the blues. I'm talking about the blues.
Back it up a little.
I'm talking about the brown bottle blues.
Anyway,
Can take away the blues.
pretty fun technique. And again, can be applied to any element in the mix. It's great on drums. It's great on bass. Vocals clearly works well. And the other technique I'm actually also going to demonstrate on vocals as well. But that is essentially how parallel compression works. You're splitting the signal, you're applying a compressor to the channel itself, and then you've got that redirected to a bus or a subgroup, and there's a secondary compressor there as well. Another thing you could do is kind of switch that into a limiter. So you've got a compressor on the channel itself, and then going into a limiter in the subgroup, which kind of gives you a little bit more of an intense effect to that. And then let's talk about 3 minutes. Okay, let's do series compression in 3 minutes. I know Golden's got a hard out at 4, so we'll say goodbye to her in just a minute here. So series compression is essentially more or less the same technique, but instead of blending the two signals together, having them split and going and being processed separately and then merged together, I'm going to keep the signal chain linear, meaning I'm going to have my compressor on my channel itself. I'm still going to send that into a group, but I'm not going to be sending the channel directly to the main output. It's going to actually go straight to the group and then out of the subgroup into the main output from there. So the signal chain remains linear, and the two compressors are in line with each other. So it's hitting one compressor and then going out and hitting a second compressor in line in series. So that's where that term comes from. And we'll set that up. To do that, all I'm going to do is go into my setup tab of my vocal channel here and simply unassign that from the main. And it is already going to that first subgroup, so now that its signal path is linear. Its signal path goes to the subgroup, and then from the subgroup to the main output. And with this, I'm actually going to do what I just said. I'm going to take this and turn that into a limiter now. I'm going to back that off. And what you get here is less of a coloration or less of a creative technique, and more of a functional technique in that you got your one compressor, your main compressor, kind of smoothing out the vocals themselves and kind of allowing you to mix them a little bit better within your complete mix. And then you got it going to this limiter right before the output, so that limiter can kind of basically just kind of stand in the way and stand guard in case there are any peak transients that kind of might hit the main output. You can kind of use that as sort of just like you would on the main output itself, but instead of limiting the entire output mix, we're just limiting that singular channel and making sure that it doesn't ever get out of line and misbehave and get super loud or anything like that. That looks like Golden is leaving us now. Thank you very much, Golden. And we will see you next time. And I'll wrap up for the rest of us right now. So let's go ahead and engage that. So yeah, as I was saying, running this in series, putting a limiter in the bus kind of at the end of that signals chain kind of acts as a little safety net, more or less. And if we play this, got that hitting way too hard. So basically, what I would do with this technique is I would find the point at which it's kind of just kissing it, and I would actually back it off from that point. Because we like the way it's sounding, we've got our compressor doing most of the main work. All we really want this for is to catch any surprise, any crazy transients. If he drops the mic or hits the drummer with the mic, or something kind of out of the ordinary happens, You know, we want the limiter to just kind of catch those things. We don't necessarily want to hear what it's doing. And to take us on home here, I actually have 2 buses already set up. I've got labeled horns here, so I kind of pre-built this. I'm using this same technique on my horns here. Let's see here. And this is really cool to do. So if you'll notice, I've got these muted because I kind of was saving this for a surprise at the end here. And because of the way I've set this up, the track hasn't had horns in it. You might have heard little sprinklings of the horns that are kind of being picked up by other microphones in the session here. But up until this point, the horns haven't really been as they should in the mix. And that is more or less because I wanted to send us off with a really cool demonstration of this series compression technique used on a horn section. So if you can see, I've got 3 horns in this mix. I've got a saxophone, a trumpet, and a trombone. Each one of these has an individual compressor on the channel that's doing some light compression work to the channels. And these are all set independently to best serve each of those channels on its own. From there, I've got my 3 horns going into you saw 2 different subgroups. I'll explain why I have 2 in a second. But I've got them going into, we'll say, a subgroup for now. And then in the subgroup, oops, I've got a couple of other things happening. I've got some additional compression happening, which is slightly, not much actually, but slightly more more than the individual ones. But other than it being slightly more compression, it is a unified compression. So each instrument has its own compressor that is tailored to that instrument and kind of acting as it should. And then all 3 of them are going to another singular compressor so that the whole section, the whole group is compressed together. And that just kind of glues all 3 of those things together and just gives them a really nice character within the mix and an additional level of control within the mix as well by compressing those all together. So here's what this sounds like. We'll start this over. Whoa, horns. And now if I go in here and turn these off, let's go ahead and just listen to that intro again. Okay, it's not bad. Sounds like horns, sound nice. But if we turn these on, they've got a little bit more presence, but at the same time they're not overpowering anything, but they're there. They've got a really nice seat in the mix. That's one of the main advantages of compression, really, however you're using it. It really allows you as the mix engineer to get certain elements of the mix just to play well with other elements and for everything to kind of be glued together in some form and really just kind of, nothing's overpowering anything else. You've got nice maintained level control over everything independently. And so there's some many advantages to being able to apply compression effectively to your channels. And so this will kind of conclude, this will conclude the topic here of compression part 2. So we went through limiting, series and parallel compression with some examples of each one. Hope that was somewhat insightful. No music sound. Well, you may have come in slightly late. There is I've got the audio streaming through a secondary browser. There's a link to, if you look in your chat, there is a link called Listen to Audio Movers. That is where my mixer is streaming through. So it's sort of independent from the where are we? Zoom, the Zoom call. Sorry about that. Can we come back and do a webinar on EQ, please? Yes, I will absolutely do that. I've actually got that on my my pipeline for these sessions. So yep, there, look for that in the future. Let me go ahead before we go. I'm gonna grab the link to our on-demand page, so you can kind of go back and take a look at previous, as I try to talk and internet at the same time. I'm not good at this. All right, copy link. And paste. There you go. So if you go there, there's all of our topics that we've done so far, except for compression part 1 right now, are available to watch on that page on our website. I encourage you to go check it out and kind of explore any of those topics that pique your interest. And again, we are going to kind of extrapolate this series out. I will be doing a series, a webinar on EQ pretty soon. We may even kind of continue the compression discussion slightly. But yeah, we're going to be getting into some really nice, really cool, much more audio knowledge stuff and less kind of mixer-centric things. Although I think I probably will kind of cycle through a few more of the actual TouchMix training topics here and again. So definitely, keep checking on our Fresh Bites page for those topics as they come. Right now, beyond today, I don't have anything calendared out yet, but we should have a few more dates on the calendar by the end of this week. So definitely, early next week, maybe kind of stop by and check that out, see what we got going on. Hopefully something looks interesting to you guys. And if you have topics that you kind of would like me to cover or like us to cover, we are open to suggestions. Feel free to email me or shoot me a note. Here, I'll give you this, since we're all friends now. That is my email address. Copy that down. Feel free to hit me up, ask me questions if you like, suggest webinar topics to me. I also frequent, again, and if you are not a member of the TouchMix user group on Facebook, I highly encourage you to join that group. It's a very, very fun group full of a few thousand TouchMix users from around the world at this point. So it's cool, it's very insightful, a lot of help can be found there as well. I am on there daily, kind of just poking through, offering assistance as needed, having TouchMix conversations. So if you find me on there, feel free to shoot me a note. I'm happy to take recommendations and suggestions for this webinar series here, and hopefully serve you guys some valuable information that you're asking for. Okay, with that, I think I'm gonna allow myself to stop talking. I'll put it out there one more. Let's see here. We got great, okay. I'd like to hear more about the QSC line array and delay speakers. I can certainly take that down. We can certainly do a topic where we talk about that stuff. Very good suggestion. Thank you for that, Alex. Appreciate that. One last chance. I'll go ahead and open it up for a last round of questions. If anybody's got any questions they'd like, pertaining to the topic, pertaining to compression in general, pertaining to any of the techniques that I kind of covered here, limiting, what may have it going once, going twice. Nothing. Last chance. Final offer. Okay. Then let's go ahead and call it. Thanks, guys. I appreciate everyone hanging out, and hopefully it was valuable to you. Like I said, check our calendar for upcoming webinars, and I hope to see you again. Signing off.